I wasn't alive for Pete Rose, and I have a lot of respect for him. I know a little bit about him. My grandfather used to tell me how great of a hitter he was and how respectable he was over there in Cincinnati with the big green, big red machine.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And with Johnny Bench there and Joe Morgan and even the young Barry Larkin, coming into that team and really the growth of that team and that organization as a whole. To me, I think it's wrong for what the league has done to Pete Rose. What you've seen with the Astros and how Rob Manfred really didn't cut down and lay the hammer on the Astros. Why, in your opinion, why is it that the league is still laying the hammer on Pete Rose?
Well, I couldn't tell you why. I think the one thing that stands out to me, and I guess maybe this is why, is just because it's one rule, betting on baseball. It's been made very clear. There's no gray area. It's plastered in every clubhouse, even all the way down to the minor leagues. And so there's no wondering about how wrong it is. It's very clear. It's cut and dry. So maybe that's the reason. I really don't know why they're so steadfast on upholding his lifetime ban and keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. I couldn't tell you. I'm not Rob Manfred's office,
right?
But I think the play speaks for itself, and the player and the career that he had speaks for itself. He just made such a big impact on the game, and with the Hall of Fame being a museum that honors the history of the game, boy, it's hard to just leave that out of the Hall of Fame and leave a guy that's career is that significant to the game of baseball, leave him out of the Hall of Fame. It's hard for me to wrap my head around, but at the same time, baseball's clearly got its reasons for doing it. And I just, I'd love to see him in the Hall of Fame at some point. But hopefully that'll happen. And I think at some point it will happen. I just don't know when that'll be.
Right.
The Reds have one of the more unique prospects in Hunter Greene that was highly touted. I think it was 2014 was his draft. He was a guy that could pitch, a guy that could play in the infield, a guy that could run. What have you seen in terms of Greene, in terms of maybe the little bit of time that you've seen him when you were broadcasting in Double-A, and also what role do you think he would play on the Reds, who are already a deep team as it is, when he does come up either this year or maybe next year?
Well, I think he's still a ways away. This is going to be a big year for him because he's still got to recover from Tommy John surgery. He missed all of last season. He wasn't going to be back really until probably right about now this season. And he hasn't played above low A Dayton yet. So he's still got a long ways to go. He's certainly got an electric arm. He'll be a pitcher now. I mean, he was, when he was drafted, it was more of a two-way player. I think you'll see him stick to pitching at this point. But he's certainly an exciting prospect. But first things first, he's just got to get healthy. I had a chance to talk with him. We do a Reds caravan every year, and we travel around to cities and towns throughout Reds country. And he was on my leg of the caravan, and he was just such an engaging young man, very bright, really intelligent, and so I think the world of him as a person, and I'd like to see him have success on the field. The talent is certainly there, so now it's just a matter of how does he come back from Tommy John and see where his career goes from there. But he's certainly got a bright future, and Reds fans are certainly excited about him. And by the time he gets to the big league level, it'd probably be, if he's there next year, if he's here in Cincinnati next year, that will be a pretty fast progression for him. And so I think, I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, but it's possible he'll lose a year of development this year if the minor leagues don't play. We certainly hope that they will. But if that happens, how's that affect his development? So it might be a little while before we see him, and who knows what the rotation will look like at that point.
You mentioned this guy earlier, Nick Senzel. He was a top 10 prospect in baseball at one point, and the Reds' top prospect. He was kind of up and down. He had some minor league options, and he had some injury issues. But he also is very versatile, which is interesting. You mentioned you think center field is a likely spot for him. Do you think that's going to be something he plays all season? And also, do you think, can he make this year to be a big leap for him in terms of what he was supposed to be as a prospect?
Well, there's no question he has the talent. That's not a doubt in my mind at all. We saw him last year play a very, very solid center field. If you saw him out there, you would have no idea that it was his first time ever playing center field. He did a really nice job. He's an excellent athlete. He was a shortstop in college a little bit. So was drafted as a third baseman, had played some second base, has even played a little bit of shortstop, and then he got moved to center field. So he's been all over the place, and that versatility still exists for him. I think if he moves back to the infield for whatever need might arise, that would be a pretty natural transition for him. But he's the team center fielder. There's no question about that, and he's certainly capable of playing defensively, Major League center field. I would almost say that it's funny to say this about him because you only say this based on the limited sample we had with him last year, but that is the question for him. And the reason I say that sounds silly to say, I saw him in the minor leagues coming up, and this is one of the best pure hitters I saw come through the Reds minor league system in my 7 years with one of their affiliates. I still don't think that that's much of a question mark for him. I think he'll hit at the major league level. I think he'll be a very solid hitter at the big league level. And like I said, I think he's going to play a good center field. The question is, can he stay healthy? That's been something that's plagued him a little bit over the last few years. And I know he's hungry to prove that he can. He had surgery on a torn labrum over the off season. So he was still working his way back from that in spring training. Now it looks like he'll be healthy when the bell rings, if and when the season gets started. So that's some good news. But he's out to prove that he can stay healthy throughout a full season, and the Reds certainly want to see that. And if he does, yeah, I think he'll be the prospect that the fans are hoping for.
Last question for me, Tommy. The growth of Cincinnati and the Reds organization, their farm system, this has been a team that has really starting to rebuild with their veterans and their young players. They have one of the best farm systems in baseball. A lot of their young players are starting to come up, like we were just talking about. Do you think that this Cincinnati Reds team are built for the future? Do you think that this team could win consistently now with some of the young players and the veteran players that they have with their organization?
Well, that's really hard to say. You just don't know how it's all going to play out. And my thing with minor league prospects and prospects are the future of the game. There's no question about that. But you really don't know what you have until they get major league experience. So you can have a great farm system. You can have a lot of depth, but the question is how many of those guys are going to pan out, and how many of those guys are going to pan out at the positions where you're going to have a need when their time comes. I mean, there's so many question marks surrounding that and prospects. The way you see teams sustain success, those prospects work out when teams can't financially re-sign somebody and they have to promote from within, it works out. And so, yeah, you have to have that to sustain success. I know this organization is building for that to be the case, so that they don't just have some success for a year or two and then have to start all over again. I've had several conversations with Reds owner Bob Castellini about that very topic. He wants to make sure that once they get to a point where they are competitive, not just within the division, but battling for a World Series title, that they're doing it year in and year out. You've got to do it with the farm system, like you guys talked about. They've done a lot through drafts, trades to build up that farm system. I just hope it all comes to fruition. But again, you just don't know until you see them at the major league level. But that, I can assure you, is a goal of this team, is to be able to do that and sustain success once they have it at the highest level.
Last question from me. This is referring to your broadcasting. You actually followed a guy in Marty Brenneman, who was a longtime radio announcer for the Cincinnati Reds. Did you ever get to work with him directly, for one? And did he have a big influence in your broadcasting style? And what do you remember most about, if you did work with Marty, remember most about him as a person?
Well, I mean, Marty and I are still friends. I mean, he lives here in Cincinnati just because of all the coronavirus stuff and the COVID-19. We haven't really got together. But, he came out to spring training a couple of times and we got together a little bit. He is just so much fun to be around. And he wasn't a guy that was just here for a long time and did the games and went home. He was and still is and will be entrenched in this community. I mean, he is a legend in these parts. So to take over for a guy like that, I don't like to use the word replace, because you don't replace a guy like that. His legacy will live on forever. He's been on the call for so many iconic moments in this team's franchise, or in this franchise's history. Those calls will live on forever. So Marty and this team will be synonymous always. But to take over for a guy like that is really extremely humbling for me, because I consider it a huge, huge honor. To get a big league broadcasting gig is an honor in and of itself, but to take over for a guy like that, and not just him, but the legacy of broadcasting for the Cincinnati Reds is really, really impressive. Before Marty, there was Al Michaels was in that seat. Joe Nuxall has a great legacy here. He pitched for this team. In fact, he's the youngest major leaguer of all time. I think he was 15 when he made his major league debut with the Reds. So he played here, then broadcast here for a long time. Jeff Brantley does a great job. But even before guys like that, I mean, Wade Hoyt is a Hall of Famer. Red Barber kind of broke in here with the Reds. So you're talking about some of the real powerhouses in the industry. And that is something that is very special to me, just as a fan of broadcasting. But you asked about Marty and the things that stand out to me. I mean, the guy has just a tremendous sense of humor, and he'll talk some trash now. I mean, you've got to be on your toes. He's going to come at you, and he's not going to take it easy on you either. And you better be ready to dish it right back, because if you don't, he will bury you. And so, to me, the challenge of that is kind of fun, because that's there's a little of that in me. And so that's been a lot of fun. He lights up a room. I mean, he's got this personality. He's not a very big guy, but his personality is just humongous, and he will make you laugh right out of the gate. He's just such a fun person to be around. And I did have a chance to work with him. I was in the booth all year last year. I filled in for him, and if he worked with strictly an analyst who didn't do any play-by-play, Jeff does, 2 or 3 innings a game. And but whenever Jeff was off, Marty would work with strictly an analyst, and they didn't do any play-by-play. So I would step in and give Marty his 3 innings off. And in spring training, we did 10 games together, just him and I. And it was just so much fun. You talk about everything under the sun on the air. And he's such an intelligent guy that can talk about just about any subject you throw at him. And that can be a lot of fun. And on top of that, he understands that, baseball and baseball announcing, it's not rocket science. You got to have fun with it. And nobody gets that more than him. He brings the listeners into the conversation so well. He just lets them in on the fun. And that, to me, is one of the things, besides just calling the action and bringing the games to life, it's bringing the listener into the broadcast. That, to me, is something he does better than anybody that's ever done it. And that was something I really took from him.
Tommy, before we let you go, have you been watching the ESPN Last Dance, the 98 Bulls championship team?
Well, I got started on it late, so I missed the start of it. So now I'm going back and rewatching. I think I just finished the 4th one, so I'll probably watch a couple more tonight. But yeah, I have been watching it. It has been just an incredible documentary, and it just that team. Like, you talk about a dynasty. That Bulls dynasty is about as good as it gets in sports, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think anybody realizes. Some of the young kids don't realize how great Michael Jordan really was and how dominant he was in a game where I thought the 90s basketball, the NBA in the 90s was, to me, the best basketball I've seen, and I was born in 1982.
Well, it's incredible when you look at the fact that Jordan understood that he couldn't do it by himself. He relied heavily on the pieces around him. The thing that has stood out to me is I didn't realize how much of an impact Dennis Rodman had on those teams. I knew Jordan and Scottie Pippen, but the impact that Dennis Rodman had and the dynamic that he had with the other guys on the team, that to me has been pretty fascinating. That was cool to see all that stuff.